Hey y'all, you might notice that the long arm is actually empty right now. There's nothing on here. At the beginning of this video, I was loading up the backing for a quilt. Shocking, right? What happened was I turned the backing upside down and life happened. I needed to go make dinner. My friend was coming, so my time between making dinner and my friend coming was limited. And when she arrived last night, I told her what happened and that I was going to need to repin the backing to the quilt. And she said, "Oh, that's even better because I really wanted to learn how to do that." So last night, when she came over, we took the backing off, repinned her backing, got the quilt loaded up, and in about 2 hours time we had this sucker quilted. It was amazing. The biggest fun part for me as a newish long arm quilter who is still learning what it means to work on a long arm was that I was able to show her how to load the quilt. We were able to get the whole thing ready to go. We were able to get this quilted, and I learned something last night that I knew but needed reinforcement in, and that was and this kind of goes back to learning how to free motion quilt and why normally I have either music or a movie playing in the background. There is something about a distracted brain that, okay, so let me back up a second. A lot of us talk about developing muscle memory. And basically, actually is a well-developed eye-hand coordination that comes with dedicated practice. In listening to a Brené Brown podcast with a neuroscientist, he was talking about if you ask somebody who's an expert tennis player or master tennis player to show you their serve and explain what they're doing as they're doing it, they actually can't do it because they've done it so much. The brain is actually on autopilot. It's telling you what to do without giving you explicit directions for what to do. So last night, and I will tell you this, as a free motion machine quilting teacher, and I demo sometimes, and I try to talk through the demos, and I admit it's a little challenging to talk through the demos, only because I have to think, not only do I have to think about what I'm saying to you, but I have to think about what I'm doing. So there's two thought processes that have to go on because I'm explaining what my brain does on autopilot. So last night, while she was quilting, our process was last night that I would show her something and then she would do that something. And it worked really well. And I was watching, as I watched her, this was really fascinating. I could see her start struggling. And I was sitting over there on my phone, just trying not to bother her. And then I realized, wait a minute, she doesn't have autopilot down yet. It's gonna be a while. Even for me on the long arm, I don't have autopilot down yet. I have noticed a distinct shift in how I quilt over the last few weeks, it's been, I have to tell you, it's been really fascinating. But I'm not on autopilot yet, which is okay. I'm okay with where I am. So the more I talk to her, the less she thought about what she was trying to do, the easier it actually became for her. Now, I don't know that that process would actually work for everybody, but what I do know is that last night, in the space of 2 hours, we got a small quilt quilted, and she was really happy. This quilt isn't intended to be show quality, and she knew it, but you know what? She's like, oh, she was just so excited to have it done. So so while we were talking about this last night, and while we were quilting this quilt, I had this little epiphany. And I have little epiphanies all the time. I have a quilt that there are special circumstances behind this quilt. So I have a quilt that I need to actually get done pretty quickly, and I think it's one of those things that is kind of messing with my head a little bit. Okay, we all have those quilts where it's like, we know we need to get it done, we don't want to get it done because there's other stuff involved with it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I have chosen a thread color. So I'm going to actually pause the video for a second and pull a couple of things together so that I can get moving on the quilting, and then I'm going to walk through basting, putting the backing on, and then choosing my batty and all that. So hang tight for just a few minutes. Hey, welcome back. Alright, so I got all the things that I needed to do. So I actually have, if you can see, let me zoom in a little bit over here, I think. Yep, if you can see, I have threaded up the Moxie. I have thread on there. You can see my channel lock. And now I'm going to take some time in this section of the quilt. So I'm going to go, oops, sorry for the zoom in like that. I am going to start loading the quilt. Now, there's always a couple of things. Step 1, grab your pins. Oh, I love finding things. These pins with the great heads are great because it's easy to help load the quilt. Step 2, grab your backing and give it a good press, and as easy as you can, however you want to do it, find the center. Now, when you load your quilt up, I'm going to back up just a little bit. When you load your quilt, you want to put it in the center of the quilt. One of the things that I'm going to try later on down the road is to load a couple of quilts on the same backing and work from that way. But for now, I'm just loading the backing. It's actually too long, and that's okay, because later on when I trim it down, I'm going to use the rest of the length to actually be the binding on the quilt. And I could cut it now, but it's kind of pointless. So one thing that I didn't do yesterday, as I mentioned in the earlier part of the video, is I didn't put the pretty side down. So this time I'm actually going to check. Part of my tell is going to be that the color on the pretty side is much more vibrant, can you see that, than the color on the wrong side. And this actually happens. Now here's the thing. It's your quilt, it's your rules, you get to decide. So I'm deciding that the really pretty side is going out, and this is a gorgeous fabric. So then once you know where your center is, you find the center of your leader, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of length. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I'm short. So I'm going to bring my pins over and start pinning around the center. And you pin to the edge of the leader where it's kind of hemmed, and you can, there's so many ways to load a quilt. Like seriously, we can totally do this. Even for basting a quilt that you're going to use on the home sewing machine, there's so many ways. What I learned at Handy Quilter was about you take big bites, just so that there's not quite so much bulk on there, and then from the end of the pin to the header of the next one, it's about 1/4 of an inch away. And so, you know, I've been quilting long enough, and you've probably been quilting long enough too, that we can just do that. Okay, it's pinned to the leader pole. Now, one of the things that I need to do is walk off camera for a second because I need to latch this. So actually I don't. So I'm actually going to start rolling this up, and one of the things that I want to do is just make sure that the edges are kind of staying parallel to each other as I'm rolling it, and it takes a little bit of time to do it, but in the end it's worth doing. Oh, one thing that you'll notice is when I did this, I pulled the leader as close to me as I could. I'm short, so I needed it as close to me so I wasn't bending and hunching over. So now I get to pull that up, start pulling that up. Okay, and what I'll do even at this point is start smoothing it out just so that things stay smooth. And I don't want bunches and puckers along the way. Okay, so now on to part 2 of putting the backing on. You'll notice, I'm not sure that you can tell, so I'm gonna bring the camera over. Okay, so a couple things to notice. My edges are fairly well lined up. It's even across the way. Now what I have is, this is for your quilt top. This is the other part for your quilt backing, and I have the fabric, I have the backing lined up here, and I've got some slack. What this does is just allows me to easily pin this and go along. So I'm going to get this pinned and folks at Handy Quilter taught me is at the end of your quilt, your quilt backing or your quilt, when you're doing that, put the last pin in the opposite direction of the other pins. And this is just so as you're rolling things up, you're not going to get hurt. Okay, there we go. So now I have this pinned. And I will roll the backing up onto here. Again, I'm going to make sure that over time, with every few rolls, I make sure I smooth everything out. everybody, welcome back. It is the next day and I am getting ready to quilt. I've finished the surface of the quilt, meaning that the quilt that I'm working on is appliqué down to the backing, not the backing. The quilt that I'm working on is appliqué down to the top, and I am getting ready to put it on the surface of the quilt. That my machine is started up, and I'm also actually ready to do the Instagram live that I'm going to do in a little while. Right now what you see is over the surface of the bars I have the batting down. For this project I'm using wool batting, and one of the coolest things that I saw whenever we were out in Utah was how to put the batting down. Now the batting's here. I've got it cut basically to the size of the quilt that I need to do it, and you sort of work in a different format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the quilt over here. I'm going to tighten this pole up just a little bit so that the backing is not fairly loose, but it's not like super snug. But I also don't want it hanging down. Then I know how long the backing itself is really long, so I know I've got some flexibility in terms of where I put this. So I'm going to leave a good couple of inches at the top just to make sure that I've got space so I'm not hitting the back of the bar. I'm going to bring this down, and then normally you would put this on a pole, but I really do like to float my quilts. So I'm going to snug this down just a little bit. I'm going to put the quilt underneath. Make sure I still have it lined up. Now here's where the fun part comes in. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to bring the quilt back, the quilt top up here. I'm going to bring my batting over and line it up just a little bit beyond the quilt top itself. Now I'm going to roll this down. I'm rolling the batting down. And then I'm also going to, come on, stay where you're supposed to. I didn't pull this up enough. I'm going to pull this quilt top up a little bit more. And re-roll just to have everything sort of all in one place at the right time. And I'm just going to snug this under here, sneak it under. And this is why you want just a little bit of, you don't want everything so tight. Okay, now that I have that in here, I'm going to bring this over, and now I'll be able to pull the batting. Alright, now I have that lined up roughly where I want it. And I can adjust just to make sure I have it exactly where I need it. I'll bring the quilt up where I want it. Get this kind of straight. Alright, under normal circumstances I actually do make my backing wider, so that way when I put the clamps on, and I need to loosen this one up, so pardon my head. But the clamp system is actually not really gripping the quilt because I don't want it to do that. Alright, I'm going to loosen this up, bring it over. Now you want the clamps just to give enough tension. You don't want it to pull this way. You want it just enough tension so everything's not super tight. But this, having the clamps there too, also gives me a way of visualizing where the edges of my quilt are. And I'm back. One thing I wanted to show you this afternoon, and I'm gonna kind of get close up on it, is changing the needle. I knew I need the needle, this needle is actually threaded, but I also knew I needed to change my needle. And so I need one more component because of course not everything is right where I want it. So I'm going to, okay, there we go. It's focused. Changing the needle isn't really very hard. It's just a little bit, I'm going to get that out of the way. I'm ready to do some afternoon, so I'm going to do some stitching on there, and of course, there we go. Alright, so I have my hex wrench, the one that comes with the machine. One thing I really love about the Moxie is everything comes with it, and I'm going to loosen this up. Oh, that's the foot. Don't loosen the foot unless you absolutely need to. I'll just make sure that's snug. Okay. And here we go. I'm on the correct side now. Okay, I'm going to loosen this up a little bit. Here we go. Old needle. Taking one out of the package. Okay. Put that kind of in there. I need to make sure that I'm in the right position here. So I'm going to feel up the needle. That goes towards the back. There we go. Just looser. That should be good. I'm going to take any lint off the thread and pop that right in there. Yay, did that in one shot. Alright, I'm going to get this stuff off here. Move it off to the side. And then zoom back out. All right. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes when I try to demo things, they don't go quite as planned, but that's okay. I did manage to thread my needle in one shot. What I am going to do is I'm going to hold that top thread. I'm going to take one stitch, and then I'm going to grab that bobbin thread and kind of give this a pull through. And I'm going to do it with do it this way. This way my thread is exactly where I want it. And I am about ready to start stitching. So here we are, quilt all basted and ready to, quilt all on the frame and ready to go.